Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. You're free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is education, and particularly the issues of atheism, deconversion, biblical studies, and theology, and the various evils thereof. Today we're going to be continuing on in our series called The Tall Tale of Jesus, a Skeptics Disharmony of the Gospels, where I challenge the basic premise that the life of Jesus Christ is witnessed by 4 witnesses in the Gospels, and I'm going to demonstrate repeatedly, episode after episode, that for the most part that is untrue. And so that's the main criteria by which every passage we deal with in this series is judged. And the second criteria is any other oddities that seem to be strange or undercut the credibility of the passage. Today we're looking at Simon's wife's mother, who is healed. This is coming off the heels of the demoniac being cast out in the synagogue. And so we pick it up in Mark chapter 1, verse 29. It says, "And immediately after they came out of the synagogue, they came into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was lying sick with a fever, and immediately spoke to Jesus about her. And he came to her and raised her up, and taking her by the hand, the fever left, and she waited on them." The real issue to me here is, of course, that Jesus heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Now, if you're a Roman Catholic out there, I want to let you know something about your church. They literally try to sidestep this part of the gospel. This is one of the other oddities that I'm going to comment on here. It's interesting that the Roman Catholic Church tries, in some respects, to fight for the historicity of the life of Jesus and the Gospels. But the moment the Gospels counteract church dogma and doctrine, they immediately get very defensive and come up with alternate interpretations to get around it. This is one of those passages where they do that a lot. The very fact that Jesus' mother-in-law or Peter's mother-in-law is mentioned, what we have there is that all of a sudden Peter is married. He has to be married to have a mother-in-law, which means he also may have had children and other things. But there is no mention of any of that, other than we wouldn't know that he had a wife unless he had a mother-in-law. So we know that. So the whole doctrine of priests being celibate and unmarried is a later addition, and everybody knows it, yet the church has always tried to go back and say, oh no, that was from the very beginning. Simon Peter was never married, he never had a spouse, and this passage cuts against that. It's funny because in order to maintain the historicity of Jesus, you really kind of have to uphold the Gospels, but it's the only real testimony that you have. And yet the Catholic Church undermines this very testimony by the fact that whenever the Gospels contradict church dogma, they, try to reinterpret the Scriptures to fit the dogma. The passage goes on, and when evening came, after the sun had set, they began bringing to him all that were ill and who were demon-possessed, and the whole city gathered at the door. And he healed many who were ill with various diseases, cast out many demons, and he was not permitting the demons to speak, because they knew who he was. Wow, what a great story about all of this. I wonder if the other passages have something different. Let's go to Mathew, who in my series is coming in second place as far as written orders. So here we go. Matthew 8:14. "And when Jesus had come to Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered to them. When even was come, they brought to him many that were possessed with devils, and he cast out spirits with his word, and healed all those who were sick. that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, He himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses. Does Luke add anything interesting to the discussion? Let's find out. It says, And he rose out of the synagogue and entered Simon's house. And Simon's wife's mother was taken with a great fever, and they besought him for her. And he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. And immediately she rose and ministered to them. Now as the sun was setting, he was sick with divers diseases brought to him, and he laid on his hands on every one and healed them. And the devils came out, crying out, saying, Thou art Christ the Son of God. And he rebuked them, saying, Suffer them not to speak, for he knew that he was the Christ. Now I wonder, in the case of all three of the synoptic gospels here, the story is very similar. There are a couple differences, though, that have to be mentioned. Mark has a very generic account, very straightforward. He healed people that were filled with demons, he cast them out. It makes Jesus into a very powerful man, but not necessarily the Son of God. But look at what Matthew does. Matthew adds the idea this fulfilled the messianic prophecy found in Isaiah chapter 53. So all of a sudden, Matthew has had to basically reinterpret Isaiah 53 and bring it in. If you look at Isaiah 53 in context, though, not all of the life of Christ fits, and not even the passage Isaiah 53 fits everything that Jesus did. So it is a little bit of a stretch with that messianic prophecy. But here we have in Luke, we have something that completely changes, completely goes over the top, and because it does so, it only has one witness. I want you to take a look. At the end, it says, And the devils also came out, crying out, saying, Thou art Christ, the Son of God. And he, rebuking them, suffered them not, for they knew he was the Christ. Now, if you go back to all the other passages, none of them really say this. Mark kind of just says he didn't suffer the devils to speak because they knew who he was. When we look at Luke, Luke is so... He doesn't even mention that Jesus told them not to speak, and he's so focused on making sure he gets this messianic prophecy, and he doesn't even mention it. All of a sudden, it seems to me that if Matthew wanted to prove that Jesus was the Christ, why wouldn't he mention what they were saying like Luke does? This is why I think Luke writes later. All of a sudden, Luke adds the whole idea that the demons were saying that he was the Son of God and the Messiah. It didn't exist in Mark. It didn't exist in Matthew. Matthew is overwhelmed by trying, this is to fulfill what Isaiah spoke. And once again, it's a little bit of a stretch. But the whole idea of Jesus being the Son of God and being the Messiah is purely Lucan. In other words, only Luke testifies at this point that this is the case, which means there's only one witness that actually talks about the demons speaking and what they said. Everybody else is silent about it. Mark talks about it, him rebuking the demons, but Matthew doesn't mention it. It's almost like the earlier two Gospels, it's a non-issue. All of a sudden, Luke makes it an issue. Now, this creates some interesting things with this to me, because it means that later on, Luke is writing his gospel and realizes he needs some sort of punch. He needs some sort of clarity. So he wants to clarify that he doesn't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. So he uses this passage and adds the idea. Whoever wrote Luke seems to be adding this idea that the demons were saying who he was, and that Jesus was trying to keep it quiet. The problem is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that somebody who is the Son of God, who starts doing miracles, suddenly believes that, all of this can be swept on the rug and nobody's going to say anything. If you do genuine miracles, people are going to be flocking at your door. I'm sorry, that's going to happen. And it seems to be that the Son of God would understand the nature of human beings and would say, hey, I know this is going to happen. My fame is going to spread around. Why would you tell people not to say anything? It still never made any sense to me when I was a Christian. It was something that I wrestled with. And now I guess I just kind of look at it as, oh, they're trying to get into Jesus, this character of humility. But this is the wrong time to do it. When Jesus is doing a miracle, healing somebody with a fever, dealing with the other issues, this is not the time to say, oh, Jesus is being really humble. He didn't want people to know that he was cleansing lepers. He didn't want people to know that he was raising the sick and casting out demons. All of these things would be very demonstrable in front of everybody's face. So why would you even think that people would keep this a secret if it was genuine? Now, I don't believe any of these miracles were genuine. I think what you can get with any story, and I've had other people, I've seen it demonstrated, where you can start a rumor about a preacher healing somebody, true or not. And a couple months later, the story is in Christendom like wildfire that this certain preacher prayed this prayer and the person was healed. But when you look at the actual story, no such thing took place. Often what I found with more of the heavy-duty preachers is that somebody said, I bet you he prayed for that person, they would get healed. And then the next person spread it, he prayed for that person and they got healed. It's a subtle change. But all of a sudden, that changes the story, and then the story gets greater and greater with each telling. This is exactly what I think happened with Jesus. I think Jesus did something that made it look like he healed somebody, and then all of a sudden, everybody's showing up at his doorstep. Now, whether this story is true or not, we don't know. Going back to our big criteria, is this 2 or 3 witnesses? Do we actually have 3 witnesses that Jesus healed, first of all, Simon Peter's mother-in-law? No, not really. What we have is the Markian tradition, which is based on the oral tradition, and then we have Matthew and Luke basically copying him almost word for word. It's only when we get to the second half of the passage that all 3 gospel writers get very different. Matthew is the only one that mentions that this fulfills Isaiah. Mark doesn't really mention it. He says that Jesus rebuked the demons and told them to be quiet, but he doesn't say why. Luke is the one who tells us why, but that makes Luke's material completely unique. The demons talking backward and forward with Jesus is purely in the Gospel of Luke. 1 witness. None of the other Gospels talk about it. At best, we can say that the places where the Gospels agree, we have 1 oral tradition that Mark wrote down and that Matthew and Luke copied. We simply don't have any other good explanation of why this would be. And then as we go on forward, we see that Luke adds the whole idea late in the game that the demons were saying something about the Son of God. It seems very convenient that the third gospel writer, the person third in line, so he says, hey, I could really kind of put a punch in Jesus being the Son of God here and add some stuff to make that happen. If we go on just a little bit farther, what we see is that Jesus becomes an itinerant preacher. Mark 1:35 through 39. It says, in the morning, rising a great while before day, he went out and departed to a solitary place and there prayed. And Simon and they that followed after him. And when they found him, they said to him, all men seek for thee. He said, then let us go to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for therefore I am come forth. And he preached in the synagogues throughout all Galilee and cast out devils. Okay. What do the other ones say? Matthew puts it this way. And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching the synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all manner of sicknesses and all manner of diseases among the people. And his fame went throughout Syria. And they brought to him all the sick people that were taken with divers in torments, and those that were possessed by devils, and those that were lunatic, and those that had palsy, and he healed them. There followed him great multitudes of people from Galilee, from Decapolis, and from Jerusalem, and Judea, from beyond the Jordan. Matthew basically presents the idea that Jesus became very, very popular because of what he did. Mark just talks about what he did. What about Luke? Seeing Luke as the guy that gives us the idea that Jesus was trying to be humble and telling the demons to be quiet because he didn't want people to know that he was the Son of God. And when it was day, he departed and went into the desert place, and the people sought him, and came to him and stayed there, and he did not so that he should not depart from them. And he said to them, I must preach the kingdom of God in other cities, and therefore I am sent. And he preached in the synagogues of Galilee. The whole thing about Jesus becoming famous that we see in Matthew, Luke basically deletes it. Doesn't even talk about it. Why? Because Luke has gone to extraordinary lengths to say, okay, these demons were telling everybody that Jesus was the Son of God and the Christ, and he's telling them to be quiet. And now Jesus gets real humble, goes off and prays somewhere, and then says, no, I'm not going to deal with that fame. I'm going to go preach the gospel in these other cities that haven't heard of me yet. What a contrast in the nature of Jesus between Matthew and Luke. Matthew has Jesus coming out and he's getting popular and followers are following him from everywhere and people are hearing him and he's casting out devils and healing the sick and he's going around doing all this stuff. And Matthew really hypes all this up because he wants to prove that Jesus was the Messiah that they were all looking for. Luke seems to have a different objective with his gospel, to present maybe the humility of Christ. And so because he does that, he literally has Jesus shushing the devils not to tell people that he's the Christ, and then having him going off to a solitary place to pray, and then when they find him, he's like, I need to go to these other gospels. Let's not really deal, let's run from the fame and go do other things. Isn't it interesting that Matthew embraces the fame, but Luke seems to run from it? Which Jesus is the real Jesus? That becomes a real question because the gospel writers here at this point diverge. They actually offer us two very different opinions about Jesus and two very different events. It should be noted that Matthew is the only one that mentions Jesus got famous, so therefore he stands as a single witness at this time that Jesus got famous. Luke doesn't mention that at all. Mark simply states the order of events. He doesn't really get into the details or anything else. Jesus goes off and prays. So, people are looking for you. Jesus says, let's go to the and he preached in the synagogues throughout the day and cast out devils. That's all Mark says. Very simple, very straightforward. Matthew hypes that to the hilt, like puts Jesus over the top as this great teacher, Messiah, and miracle worker. And then Luke, in his gospel a few years later, dials all that back because it made it look like Jesus was, trying to be famous. And Luke's trying to explain, no, Jesus was humble. He wasn't really trying to be famous. It's just something that happened. Yeah, see, this is where the Gospels not only don't speak in the same manner, because Matthew's idea of Jesus being hyped up is alone. Mark kind of sort of agrees with some aspects of both, but he doesn't really hype up Jesus, but he doesn't diminish him either. Luke, on the other hand, gives us this Jesus that won't even let the demons say who he is, and then tries to hide his ministry and be quiet and subterfuge, and to no avail, because he becomes popular. What three very different pictures of Jesus with this event, with this tour of Galilee, that each of the gospel writers present. It's not even the same Jesus. Which Jesus should we step forward? The Jesus that's popular in Matthew? The Jesus that just kind of does stuff and in Mark? Or Luke, the Jesus that is so humble he won't even let the demons tell everybody that he's the Son of God, and then he goes off into a solitary place to pray, and when they find him, says, I got to go somewhere else and preach here. I've got to go somewhere else and preach here. I got to go somewhere else and preach here, and keep a low profile. But Matthew doesn't have Jesus keeping a low profile at all. Jesus becomes over the top popular, and that's when things get interesting. This is the real issue with the Gospels. Because if they're all different witnesses, whenever they do diverge like this, they become so different, there's no way they're talking about the same guy. It's just ridiculous that Jesus can be both humble and embrace the popularity at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense. And it was stuff like this that caused me to really question the whole two or three witnesses. Because on the places where both Simon's mother being healed and this tour of Galilee where they agree, great, it's pretty basic stuff. But all the stuff where they don't agree, every single time that gospel writer stands on their own as a singular witness of that particular part of the oral tradition. Is it possible that the multiple oral traditions of Jesus diverged very early, and that we had maybe several opinions about who Jesus was, what his personality was, things like that? This seems to be the case. And this is why, once again, we still don't have 2 or 3 witnesses, and there's a lot of indiscrepancies in this particular passage, particularly the Tour of Galilee, that lead me to believe that we really do indeed, when we do have a divergence in the witnesses, we have multiple different oral traditions that paint Jesus in a very different picture. And the gospel writers, with their own agendas, pick the oral tradition that agrees with their agenda, rather than picking the one that is historical. And that presents to us a historical problem about Jesus, one that will continue through the Gospels. I want to thank you for coming today. I appreciate you stopping by and listening to an old preacher pontificate about how he doesn't believe anymore and why he doesn't believe. Thank you very much. You're free to like, dislike this video and subscribe and get your notification bell set the way you want to, and share this video as much as you like. And hopefully someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Rabyd, the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.